So, we did our best, but it wasn't enough. Our line was soon closed, sighed Richard sadly. Many of my friends were either sold or scrapped. I myself was on the list to be cut up, but luckily your owner and team controller made a last-minute deal, and here I am. He finished on a happier note. The engines were quiet. Duke hummed sympathetically. He too knew what it was like to have an uncertain future. The thin controller walked into the yard, clearing his throat. Duncan shall be returned to service tomorrow, which means Richard will assume normal duties. But today, there was to be a special outing of the Sudrean Narrow Gauge Society, and they have asked particularly for Richard to pull their trade, said the thin controller proudly. Oh, sir, whistled Richard. So his joints were oiled, his fire was lit, and he set off to collect the coaches. Good morning, girls, called Richard to Angus, Ruth, Jemima, Lucy and Beatrice as he backed down onto them. The old coaches liked Richard. He's not rough with us like Duncan and Sir Handel, they would say. Richard puffed cheerfully into the top station just as the enthusiasts were climbing out of Edward's train. The enthusiasts walked backwards and forwards, admiring Richard's bright blue paint and polished brass. The two engines chatted until it was time to depart. Sir Handel grumbled crossly about the day's arrangements. The thin controller should have chosen me. Richard is only an industrial dockside engine. I was once an express engine for crying out loud, he seethed crossly. Richard is new, so it is only natural that the Narrow Gauge Society will choose him to take their train, replied Scarlowy. Sir Handel said nothing more. He just clanked crossly away. Richard dutifully took the enthusiasts through the valleys and past the lakes every now and then. They would stop and the people would walk around for a few minutes, then return to the train. It was sunset when they returned to the top station, and James was waiting to take them home. Richard's fireman uncoupled him from the coaches, and he puffed back to the shed. It was already dark by the time he reached the sheds. Richard's crew put out his fire and left for home, but what they nor had Richard realized that they had not exactly put the reverse gear into neutral position, and there was beginning to be a build-up of steam in the cylinders. Richard slept blissfully unaware of the situation. It was early morning, and the cleaners had come to polish the engine's brass and oil their joints for the day ahead. Suddenly, Richard awoke. He could feel his position beginning to move in motion. Driver shouldn't be here yet. It's far too early, he muttered to himself, and then he realized he couldn't feel his driver's hand on the regulator. Richard was in full steam and was steaming out of the shed. He wanted to whistle for help, but he couldn't. "Help me!" cried Richard. Luckily, one of the cleaners saw what was happening and ran after the runaway engine. He scrambled onto the footplate and shut off steam and probably bringing the gear back to neutral. Mr. Hugh and Richard's crew were soon on the scene. They were relieved no one was hurt, but the driver and fireman were repented for being careless. Well, Richard, we didn't know you were a sleepwalker. teased Sir Handel. "Next time you decide to wander off during the night, don't be so loud about it."